late May.
Late May, okay.
Yeah, it ends in late May, and obviously there are days off for Jewish holidays for the younger two, and then the Sparrow School is non-sectarian. But I mean they're so good about it. They're like, it's Jewish holiday, say no more, no problem, whatever it is. They're really really good that way. So it's nice. So anyway, so welcome. So what I wanted to do, and I will start by a brief anecdote about the next prayer from the Mahzor that I wanted to talk about. This was on some Yom Kippur when I was in high school, and I forget at what point in Yom Kippur we were in, but my mother said to me, "Oh, it's time for now let's do the vidui again." And my response was, "Vidui? The vidui? Vidui it?" Okay. So not my strongest pun ever, obviously, but it is. But here's why I find this kind of like not that vidui is an oddity, not that it doesn't fit with Yom Kippur. It's just the fact that the vidui is found in other parts of Jewish life. It's found in other parts of the life cycle, and also the question that we ask ourselves with vidui is kind of a similar one every year, even though the answer is a fairly reasonable one. The question is, right? We sit there, we go, we murder, we steal, the list goes on of all of these things that we have done. And it is very easy for people to say, for us to say, I didn't do all those things, right? I didn't do these particular things, so why am I apologizing for them? Now, the answer that's often given is fairly reasonable. It's that we did these things, right? It's always in the plural. We did these things. So maybe not each of us as individuals, but that we collectively as a people are guilty of all of these wrongdoings, and that our job is to, be responsible for one another and to try to be try to make society better, so that collectively we aren't doing these things anymore. But it still is this kind of, it's still this challenge, right? And especially when you consider that the vidui, when said as a deathbed confession, which is one of the other frequent times where we recite it, again, it's in the plural. However, it's very much an individual moment, right? A deathbed confession, unlike being in synagogue in Yom Kippur, a deathbed confession is usually pretty private, right? Maybe you've got a number of people surrounding you, but it's not a big hall usually, right? I mean, it's usually kind of a small, private moment, intimate moment. So in those ways, I think the vidui is a little bit of an oddity, and I do want to explore a little more as we go through it. So what we will do, let's see. So we're going to start by looking at something from the Jewish Chronicle. Is everybody able to see? Can everybody see the screen share?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing that we're going to notice when we look at this is the idea that the vidui, a vidui, right, singular, does not necessarily mean a confession per se. it's taken to mean that, but it doesn't necessarily actually, it's not necessarily that. Let's see. Mona, could you do the first two paragraphs here, beginning with the video?
The Vidui is the climactic section of each of the 5 Yom Kippur services. When bent over and contrite, we beat our breasts and enumerate the ways we have fallen short of the mark in the previous year. According to many, Vidui is the actualization of Teshuvah, repentance, Maimonides' laws of repentance, 1:1. The Torah does not clearly command repentance, but it does command Vidui, Numbers 3 or 5, 6 through 7. Our hearts may be filled with feelings of remorse and resolutions for self-improvement, but these emotions usually jostle with excuses and self-justifications. When we can articulate out loud, I have sinned, I have done ABC, the chaotic feelings of regret crystallize into sincere resolve.
All right, thanks. So kind of an important thing here, right? I mean, so we think of vidui as being almost synonymous with repentance, right? You know, we have done this, we have done that, right? And we're, you know, hitting ourselves with our fists. But so that sounds like repentance, right? But it's apparently not necessarily. So let's look at this quote here from Numbers chapter 5, verses 6 or 7, okay? And these verses are from essentially this is shortly before the section of Sota. The laws of Sota have to do with a woman who is accused by her husband of adultery. Right. And there's this whole process in which the Kohanim are trying to evaluate, did they sin or did they not? Did she sin or did she not? And there are these words that they write down that they then take the parchment and put it into the water, and then the water is it's mixed into the water, and then you drink the water, and then you go, and then if the woman floats, it says whether she's guilty or not, which in many ways feels like a very kind of absurd test. It is also the first example that we have ever seen of Sota water. So anyway, so the next time you have a Sprite, you can thank the book of Numbers for that one. Anyhow, so all right. Anyway, so this is the preamble to the whole explanation of Sota, and it says, "Speak to the Israelites when a man or woman commits any wrong toward a fellow man, thus breaking faith with the Lord, and that person realizes his guilt. He shall confess the wrong that he has done. He should make restitution in the principal amount and add 1/5 to it, giving it to him whom he has wronged." So the key word there is at the beginning of verse 7, the Hebrew, the heat vadu. And you see those last several letters in Hebrew, that's the word vidui, the heat vadu. And so really it establishes the vidui as a confession, right? But confession and repentance, I will submit here, is not necessarily the same thing. Obviously, you can't repent if you don't confess, right? Otherwise, you're just saying sorry for stuff that you didn't necessarily do. You have to be able to confess first if you're really going to apologize for it. So yes, it's not the same as repentance. However, again, we go back to the dilemma that I mentioned earlier, right? The idea that we are confessing for things that we as individuals hopefully did very little of, right? If you look at the list of the vidui, which we will go on to do in a little bit, if you look at the list, there aren't really that many things that we've probably done over the course of 1 year, right? I mean, we probably haven't done all that many things, although we probably can all identify a handful that we might look at and say, yeah, we probably could have done better this way. But it essentially means whenever we beat the breast and say we have murdered, again, it feels just a little strange when we haven't actually done that. So this is kind of the paradox there. But what this article offers, what the last thing that Mona read before, was this idea that it's one thing to say, I haven't been good, I haven't been good enough, or I've been going down the wrong path. When you start to list things, it makes it feel just a little more real. It makes it feel like, okay, here are ways that I can be better, right? Maybe with some things that we didn't necessarily do, but maybe some things that I possibly did, right? And so we see here that in the third paragraph here, vidui is usually translated as confession. However, this carries misleading connotations of self-abasement from other religions. It conveys no sense of the root meaning of the Hebrew word. Vidui in origin means to thank, praise, or most accurately in our context, to acknowledge. Okay. You don't necessarily think of a vidui as being, a moment of thanks, right? But acknowledgement, that does seem to be a little bit closer, right? So let's go to a little bit more about what that means. Let's see, Rusty, could you do those last two paragraphs, beginning with the vidui bikurim?
The vidui bikurim is a declaration of thanksgiving to God when we bring the first fruits of the land of Israel to Jerusalem. In the vidui of Yom Kippur, we peel off our customary layers of denial and rationalization to admit that we have not been who we could and should have been. In this vein, a Hasidic Rebbe said that we should not smite our hearts punitively in the vidui, but rather knock gently upon them so that they may open up to acknowledge the truth.
All right, so a couple of things here. I do want to get to the vidui bikurim in just a moment, but first, I really like this interpretation by a Hasidic Rebbe about that. I imagine you've seen people who perhaps are new to the custom of beating one's breast at the time of vidui, right? You may see teenagers or kids in the crowd who, let's just say, when they do it, they are not exactly taking it easy on themselves. They find it either amusing or, by contrast, appropriate to just, really hit harder than they ought to, right? I mean, to the point where they might hurt themselves. I feel like I've seen that numerous times. I don't know if this is something that you've experienced or seen, where people will just really, really kind of, with a sort of strength that feels really counterproductive. What we know, though, is that, but what we understand, though, from this saying is that it really doesn't mean to just, hurt oneself. It's just that, it's like you're knocking on the door here, just a little bit, just to say, hey, almost as if this is another wake-up call, right? Just kind of gentle. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Because certainly we as a religion are, certainly Jews as a people, we are not into self-flagellation. We are not among those who try to inflict pain upon ourselves, no matter what we may have done. We are not supposed to punish ourselves. punishment can be meted out by certain authorities in some ways. But of course, as we acknowledge during the times of the high holidays, that the one true judge is supposed to be God. So for us to, really go to town here, that's not appropriate. So I love this idea, just sort of, just a kind of a gentle knock, like, hello, let's wake up, let's remember this. So that's one little tip in terms of the viewing. The next thing I wanted to do, though, is to take a look at the story of the Vidui Bikurim. I recognize that, this photo may be a little small, so I'm sorry about that. I'll just go ahead and read it. This is going to sound somewhat familiar, and it's actually something that we're going to read from the Torah in just a few weeks. This is the beginning of the Torah portion of Kitavo. It is instructions for what we're of a particular ritual that we're supposed to do upon reaching the promised land. So this occurrence is not supposed to happen that early or that soon. But here's what it says. When you enter the land that Adonai your God has given you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil which you harvest from the land that Adonai your God is giving you, put it in a basket, and go to the place where Adonai your God will choose to establish God's name. You should go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge, right? Again, you have this word acknowledgement, even though vidui is not in this verse that I can see. I acknowledge this day before Adonai your God that I have entered the land that Adonai swore to our fathers to assign us. Right? So the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down from the altar of Adonai your God. All right. So in other words, so far, so in other words, you show up with a gift basket to the priest. Priest says, great, thanks, I'll put it here. And you start with an acknowledgement that, all right, this is part of the fulfillment of the promise. And then a phrase that you have heard in other contexts. V'anita ve'amarta l'fnei Adonai Elohecha, arami oved avi, v'yered Mitzrayim v'yagor sham b'mtei me'at. You shall then recite as follows before the Adonai your God. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to Adonai, the God of our fathers, and Adonai heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. Adonai freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents or wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore now I bring the first fruits of the soil which you, Adonai, have given me. You shall leave it before Adonai your God and bow low before Adonai your God, and you shall enjoy, together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty Adonai your God has bestowed upon you and your household. So, essentially, this is a required declaration of gratitude. You are enjoying the bounty of the land, but before you do, you take some of the first fruits and you basically announce, I know that this is part of the promise that God has kept. I know that this is the logical and happy conclusion of the many years our ancestors were enslaved. So this is a different kind of vidui, right? It is not one in which we are hitting ourselves. It is one in which we are giving of ourselves and saying, how great is this? How great is this? You have to give something of yourself But once you do, and once you make this acknowledgement, then enjoy. So in this sense, the vidui is a much different process. So when we refer to the vidui, it really kind of depends on which vidui we're talking about. The one we're usually talking about is this. It is in a sense either the statement of Yom Kippur, or it is a statement that one says prior to one's death. So I took this from a website of a conservative synagogue in Austin, Texas. I'll read the beginning of this. Since ancient days, it has been part of Jewish tradition that one would want to return to God in the same state of ritual purity and innocence as when one is born. In order to accomplish this, it became traditional for an individual to offer a final confession. Again, not exactly the word we use for vidui, but okay. Final confession shortly before death, the Hebrew term for which is vidui. In most cases, vidui is offered by a rabbi on behalf of the person as death approaches, but it can be offered by an individual themselves if they are so inclined, or a family member. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can say it. There are those who go through the list that we are familiar with from Yom Kippur. There are those who will literally go, Asham du Bagat, Negazal, etc., etc. They'll do that. Or the person who is saying the vidui, oftentimes a member of the clergy, but not necessarily, they will say it for them. When I have been called upon to do vidui, in this particular circumstance, I don't go through this. I usually do something more interpretive, which is something like what you find here. I made this bigger. Hopefully this is a little easier to read. Bobby, could you do the first part of this where it says Elohai v'Elohei Avotai v'Imotai. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Okay, I'm better now. My God and God of all who have gone before me, author of life and death, I turn to you in trust. Although I pray for life and health, I know that I am mortal. If my life must soon come to an end, let me die, I pray, at peace. If only my hands clean and my heart pure, I confess that I have committed sins and left much undone. Yet I know also the good that I did or tried to do. May my acts of goodness give meaning to my life, and may my errors be forgiven. Protector of the bereaved and the helpless, watch over my loved ones. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Redeem it, O God of mercy and truth. At the end approaches, the following is said with or for the dying person. Adonai Melech, Adonai Melech, Adonai Yimlech Li'olam Va'ed. God reigns, God has reigned, God will reign forever and ever. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Li'olam Va'ed. Blessed be God's name, whose glorious dominion is forever and ever.
Right. So, Adonai Melech, Adonai Melech, Adonai Melech Le'olam Va'ed. That phrase ought to sound familiar to you, not only just from general parlance, however, but also it is a somewhat popular piyut. It is a popular song during the high holiday services. In fact, I think usually Shachrit, the Shachrit Amidah, when I remember seeing it, seeing that particular one that's entitled that, but we see this phrase in other places as well. So we have this connection between these moments prior to death and these moments of acknowledgement. You know, in other words, that's what the vidui has in common. We have it's mentioned before death, and it's mentioned on Yom Kippur, because obviously with Yom Kippur, there is this these moments of facing our mortality. If for no other reason. I mean, it's the very fact that you have the Unatana Tokef, right, which talks about these moments of judgment, these moments where you say that, God, your life is in our hands. It's a very it's the same sort of idea. So this is how a statement that one says at the deathbed often gets repurposed into the Yom Kippur liturgy when we are certainly to pray to be written in the book of life, but we also acknowledge the very sad possibility that perhaps that is not in the plans for the following year. So again, you have this prayer that is, it seems to fit Yom Kippur very well because it's oftentimes synonymous with Yom Kippur. I mean, if there's one sort of visceral thing that people often remember, it's they remember that, okay, we went to synagogue and we did this, right? That's something that people easily remember. Anything that involves that kind of physical movement tends to kind of stay in people's minds. We're going to go over a little bit about what's actually in this particular confession. For now, do you have any questions or comments before we move forward to that? Again, I'm sorry for whatever background music you may be hearing. I try to minimize it, but it's very loud here. I'm sorry. I hope you're getting some notes. Okay. So now we have what's called the Vidui Dictionary. Now this is based on the Malbim. The Malbim is the acronym essentially for a German commentator, mainly known as a Torah commentator, in the 19th century. There are times when I've quoted the Malbim in sermons or on my blogs. Certainly plenty to be learned from that. And what he does is he goes through these different terms that we see. It's not the entire list of what we find in the Vidui, but it's a fairly but it's not completely comprehensive, but there's plenty to be mentioned. Was the Malbim Russian? Could have been. I thought I saw German, but I could be wrong. Eastern Europe. How about that? All right, fair enough. Okay, so we have, first of all, these phrases, these words that we see, and because so many times there are so many synonyms for sin or wrongdoing, obviously people understandably ask, why do we have all of these different words for sins? Well, according to the Malbim, they each have their own purpose. You have chatati, right? That same word is al-chet, which is another part of the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, al-chet, where we do this pretty much every line, right? And it can go on for pages. Chatati, a chet, we're referring to somebody who is an accidental sinner, but one pulled by his desires. In other words, someone whose intentions may have been good, but they were kind of following perhaps, maybe there was some selfishness in what they were doing. Okay. You have now aviti, which refers to a term that you may have heard, which is avon. What kind of sin is this? This is sin from corrupted thinking. Um, in other words, it's whether or not it's an accident is hard to say because again, people's thinking have, their point of view has been skewed in some way, whether they've skewed their own minds or whether other people have skewed their own minds, that's probably depends on the circumstance. But another word that comes from it is iva, which is, you see, more severe than the other synonyms for sin, which includes confusion and madness. One confuses the bodily kochot pressures with the derech hayashar, which is straight path. Now, this kind of sin, one can argue, however, if this is confusion and madness, well, certainly in the American legal system, we're talking about something that, if somebody has done wrongdoing, if someone has done wrongdoing due to confusion or madness, what do their lawyers usually say? Not guilty for reasons of insanity. So here, the avon, the iva, it is considered more severe, but it also involves some sort of mental anguish. So is this really as punishable? Depends on your perspective. Now, pashati is a different idea. Pesha is a rebellion performed with the powers of intellect and insight. Meaning, it's not just pushing back just out of, let's say, primordial instinct. It's doing so with a certain level of strategy and cunning, even. Right? That's a, oftentimes, well, obviously, we have been talking as a society over the last few months about the causes of rebellion and whether or not such rebellions were taking place in a premeditated way or not. This pashati is very much a premeditated rebellion. Someone who has clearly thought out what they are trying to do, and then they do it. So now, I recognize these are not in alphabetical order, but this is hopefully helpful. Ashamnu, which is the word that starts the vidui that we're most familiar with, comes from Asham, who is one who is chayav, right? The one legally liable for the punishment for his sins, right? So in other words, we start out the vidui with this immediate notion that I've done wrong and I deserve whatever I'm going to get, right? So in that sense, it really lives up to the idea of acknowledgement. It's one thing to say, yes, I did it, but I was coerced, I was misled, I was confused, whatever it might be. Shamnu goes straight to the heart of, yep, you got me. It was wrong. Whatever I did, I was wrong. Now, he'evinu, all right, also part of the vidui. This is more severe than other synonyms, right? And this is, again, from Iva, right, that we saw before. This is one that it's by reasons of confusion or madness. So here we are talking about both sins that we say, okay, yeah, you know what, guilty is charged. And other ones we say guilty due to some sort of not being in the right mind, put it that way. Is that as bad as Ashamnu? Maybe it's not for us to know. Now, Zadnu is something a little bit different. The Zed, it says here, is one who disagrees over the ways of wisdom and over the truth with protestations and inferences and plots to transgress it with repugnance. And it is opposite of the modest one who covers his face degrees within degrees and knows the fluff of his value. I love that phrase, the fluff of his value, right? As if we are all lint in some way. The fluff of his value, like Moshe covered his face. So in a sense, right, I don't know if I would choose repugnance so much as arrogance, right? We disagree with the reality that has been presented to us, and we are going to oppose it with arrogance, as in we know better than you. That is a particularly I think that's a kind of sin or wrongdoing that I think a lot of people find especially difficult to deal with in other people, right? The times when we push up against things and do so with this incredible amount of certainty. Now, Zadon, coming from the same idea, coming from the same group, is the one who opposes God in the ways of Torah, Mezid, and publicly, as it is written, the man who will do the Zadon against Adonai, he is the reviler. And if it's accompanied by excess pride, he makes fun of wisdom and wise people, as it is written. The arrogant Zed, Lakes is his name. The Zed creates schemes to commit evil against his fellow. Pretty similar. So again, we are talking about different levels or different types of wrongdoing at this point. We've gone through ones who will basically admit what they did, people who perhaps are not in their right mind, and then others who very much are intentional about what they do, but they do so because they are so certain that their way is right and that the other ways are wrong. We have Tafalnu Sheker. Its truth can be clarified immediately. Hizavnu, its truth can be clarified only later. So, in other words, the kind of the consequences and the degree to which there was wrongdoing, in one sense, the ones where it's patently obvious what exactly they've done wrong, and the kinds of things where we know that there was transgression, we just don't know necessarily how damaging that was. So those are two different things. Okay, a few more. A lakes, is inactive, doesn't do any evil, but doesn't do any good either. Just pursues wind and nothingness and frivolousness and jokes, doesn't involve himself in Torah. So this is for all the times that we have sat on the sidelines, sat in the back of the room, made jokes in the peanut gallery, threw spitballs at the proceedings, and didn't contribute, didn't help. All right? In other words, it's the people who just goof off when they could have helped. Now, I do think that in any serious situation, a bit of levity can be in order, but when things get pretty serious, you need to be able to set aside the instinct of not taking it seriously and do something about it. So that's what lots is about. This is what a late will do. Just, goofs off and ignores whatever's happening to everyone's detriment. Neopstin. This refers to degrading and scorning something, right? In other words, to take something that is perfectly legitimate and to make it and to discredit it, to make it seem insignificant or unimportant, to insult something that is probably for the good. We have Avinu, right? A sin from corrupted thinking. We mentioned that earlier. Ashanu, we talked about that earlier, rebellion performed with the powers of intellect and insight. Sararnu, this is an active enemy as opposed to one who just hates you in his heart. Meaning somebody who's just, just flat out antagonistic, right? And is willing to do what you can. You may have heard the word sorer. The word sorer may be familiar if you read the Megillah. Haman, who is often referred to as sorer HaYehudim, right? The active enemy of the people. In other words, not just a guy who, let's say, not just what we would call a lates, not somebody who's sitting on his couch at home and just saying obnoxious things, not just somebody who is saying particularly mean things, but people who are directly working against somebody who doesn't deserve it. You have Rashanu, sins intentionally against both humanity and God. And then you have Shichatnu, a mashchit, who wants to destroy for no reason. Picture a lates who actually got off the couch, right? Someone who's just going to make mischief out of, who knows, boredom, amusement, whatever the case may be. So here's a question. Why do we need all these categories? Obviously, there's different ways that we can do wrongdoing. Why are we mentioning all of them on Yom Kippur or at one's deathbed? What do you think?
There's a line in the old Silverman about for the sins I've committed knowingly and unknowingly.
Right. So, in other words, there is this desire to cover as much as ground as we can, right? We want to make sure that we're not leaving anything out. Now, we also know from the Mahzor that supposedly God sees all of our mistakes, whatever they may be. But understanding that we've done things on purpose and we've done other things not on purpose is certainly a way for us to be more meticulous about our conduct. Why else do you think we need to have so many categories?
I suppose it makes our thinking more concrete as opposed to thinking about abstractly we have sinned.
It's all too easy to just overgeneralize about ourselves, about other people, and to say, oh, so-and-so is a good person, so-and-so is a bad person. We rarely can be categorizing people along those just very like general ideas is often not helpful. We're complex, obviously, hopefully we know a lot of people who have a great deal of goodness in their lives and who just do a lot of wonderful things and are wonderful and we would call them wonderful people and good people. But even good people will have their bad moments. And the opposite is true as well. So in a sense, we are trying to we're trying to avoid the trap of overgeneralization. I also go to the Leo Tolstoy quote at the beginning of Anna Karenina, which I'm now going to mangle. I'm pretty sure what he says, though, is all happy couples are happy for the same reason. All unhappy couples are unhappy for different reasons. Now, is that true? It's hard to know. But in other words, what they're trying to say is that there are many ways that a good relationship can be derailed. But in general, a good relationship that lasts over time, they're basically doing, a few, some of the same of the basics, just a few basic things right? Even if they may be very different people, they're just doing a few basic things correct. But that there are many more pitfalls potentially, many other different kinds of pitfalls than there are paths to success. And in a sense, that may be what we're trying to say, that it's all too easy to fall into a trap of being unhelpful and in some ways worse than unhelpful, about being truly a problem for society. Now, with that said, though, I don't know if I buy that idea entirely, which is why I think it is also helpful at this time of year to take a look at a document. This is what we'll conclude on tonight, a document by Rabbi Avi Weiss, and this is called The Positive Vidui. In other words, an acknowledgement not of the bad stuff, but of some good stuff. And perhaps wonder, would Yom Kippur be enhanced if we talked like this? Instead of hitting our hearts like this, maybe raising our hands in celebration, saying, Ahavnu, Erachnu, Gadalnu, Dibarnu Yofi. We have loved, we have blessed, we have grown, we have spoken positively. We have raised up, we have shown compassion. We have acted enthusiastically. We have been empathetic. We have cultivated truth. We have given good advice. We have respected. We have learned. We have forgiven. We have comforted. We've been creative. We have stirred, I assume in a good way. We have been spiritual activists. We have been just. We have longed for the land of Israel. We have been merciful. We have given full effort. We have supported. We have contributed. We have repaired. Would something like this help our Yom Kippur service?
It certainly changes the viewpoint.
Oh, the negative framing is, I guess, is more powerful. But this sort of like gets me thinking, okay, so we confess for past sins. And you got the whole year that's gone by, so you got your inventory of sins. What about confessing for the future?
Okay.
For the sins we may commit a year from now, or 2 years from now, or tomorrow,
I wonder, it's a fair point. I wonder whether that's more what the Kol Nidre prayer is all about. Because what Kol Nidre says essentially that everything we're going to do between now and next year's Yom Kippur is annulled. Any promises we make, they don't count, right? In other words, it's this way of just saying, it's kind of this way, it's this way we begin Yom Kippur by saying, all the ways we're not going to live up to everything that we're going to talk about in Yom Kippur, all these ways that we're going to lose our resolve, let those things be annulled. So we start the beginning of one Yom Kippur trying to essentially, get rid of whatever mistakes we make. It is kind of a forward confession in that sense. So in that sense, maybe we do have that already. What I, where I think this would be helpful, and this is just a thought on my part, is that a positive vidui may be very welcome during the Ne'ilah service, at a time when we continually say the gates are closing. What we keep saying throughout Yom Kippur is, we have made all these mistakes. Nevertheless, God, do not forget the promise you made to our ancestors. We appeal to God's attribute of mercy. And we say, Avinu Malkeinu, right? Even though we've done all these, even though we don't really deserve it, please save us anyway. Maybe it couldn't hurt at Ne'ilah, at the end of Yom Kippur, to say, maybe a little more of a positive case is helpful. Because if you're a judge listening, you can say, okay, well, you've talked about all these terrible things you've done. I'm supposed to just forget them? What about some good stuff?
This could also be read in the same spirit of the question you raised at the beginning of the session, namely, individually, we haven't lived up to all of this, but collectively, we have.
Indeed, right. Look, and I hope that I have done a decent amount of things on this list, but perhaps maybe I haven't. But yes, as a group, hopefully we have done all these things.
Maybe these are New Year's resolutions.
Maybe. In that sense, maybe you say it right. Maybe you say it after New Year, right before we sound the final shofar. I don't know.
Have you presented this before? This is so familiar, and I haven't got a clue, and I can't remember, but I know that I have seen this and read this before. And have you presented it at another time? I mean, it may have been in a different context completely, but I know that I have, and I liked this. I like the idea of including it in someplace. Okay, aside from that comment, I also want to say about today's lesson. I think it was excellent. And I would like, and I'm going to go back now and maybe not tonight, but anyway, review this whole thing. I appreciated the dictionary or the listing, and it gave me a different understanding and a better understanding. But thank you. I thought this was a really very informative class, and I'd like to see it shared with more people. It opens your eyes to a lot of different things. So, but thank you.
I appreciate the kind words, and this is going right now on my YouTube page because I don't have the proper stuff to put it on Facebook, but I will then transfer the link to Facebook once I'm back in town. So, so I do expect to do that. I do appreciate that, and I don't know whether I've presented this particular part by Rabbi Weiss before, but it is something that I think I've just sort of seen floating around from time to time, and maybe there's just a lot to be. Maybe there's a lot we can gain from it. I continually say that I don't believe that Yom Kippur should be thought of as a sad day. Are there moments of sadness? Yes. Yisker, I know those are moments of sadness still, although I think the opportunity to bring back memories of those no longer with us can also bring back some sweet memories as well. I don't think that the thrust of Yom Kippur should be that of sadness. It's serious, right? There's a sobriety to it all, but not the sobriety doesn't necessarily mean sad.
I think it would be nice to include that as an addition to our service. That like maybe one of the congregants reads it like you have participants. It just has a lot of meaning. It's positive.
So I have submitted the places in the service that including English readings, but I haven't necessarily selected them. So perhaps this will be an opportunity to do that. So
Yeah.
just to maybe add a little bit of a new twist on things. So I'm glad you appreciate that.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, listen, again, thank you for putting up with my sort of traveling road show with my class and everything like
Safe
that.
trip.
Drive safely.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Safe travels,
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. Good luck, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'll be on the road in 2 months.
All right. Listen, God willing, we'll see you soon. And we'll have this class next week.
Yes. Thank you,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.